So let's talk a little bit about how to create the thesis. Remember, the thesis statement is the brains of your essay or the blueprint for your essay. Everything in your essay goes to supporting the thesis, explaining the thesis, defending the thesis, counter-arguing for it. So the thesis determines what goes in your essay, what belongs and what doesn't belong. It determines the reasons that you're going to include. However, as often is the case, even though the thesis is the heart and soul of your paper or the brains of your paper, sometimes you're not going to write it from the very beginning. You're going to write your way backwards. So I wanted to talk about 3 helpful methods of thesis development. The first one is answer the central question. If there's an essential question or a central question that has been given to you or that you've developed on your own, make the thesis your answer to that question. Secondly, maybe you know what that question is, or maybe you don't, but you kind of know what you want to talk about in the body, but you're not quite sure how to weave all of those ideas together in a thesis. Write the body first. That's okay. You are not writing your paper in the order that your reader is going to experience it. So the hook and the bridge and the thesis might be the very last thing that you write in your essay. That's okay. You might need to write as a discovery process. And even if you do have a thesis, as you are writing the essay, you might come up with new ideas. You might change your mind a little bit, maybe modify the position that you initially held. Maybe there's some points that you thought you were going to talk about that you decided, I don't want to talk about that after all. And maybe you reorganize your essay. You think, oh, I was going to talk about this first, but now I'm going to put this other piece before it. And so even if you have a working thesis to start with, you do want to, after you've written the body of the essay, go back and look and say, does my thesis still really fit what it is that I thought I wanted to say? Does it fit now that I've really worked my way through the essay? But I wanted to give you another option, which is called the Sheridan-Baker thesis machine. And so I'm going to end the slide briefly, and I'm going to bring up another document for you to look at. Okay, so the Sheridan-Baker thesis machine was created by Sheridan-Baker, who is the author of, I believe it's the Practical Stylist. And I found it. Okay, so the Practical Stylist is a classic guide to style, and the thesis machine was created by that author. And it's been used and adapted and changed different ways. And so if you go online and you Google it, you're going to find a lot of different examples of people using it. This is one from USC that I found, and I found the same examples offered by a lot of different authors. And the idea is that you start with the topic that you're going to talk about. And so whether that's cats, writing classes, or grades, and then you're going to think about it as a debate, right? If this was a debate and you had pro and con, how would you state the position? And so if you were talking about cats, you could decide, well, I want to say that cats should be subject to leash laws, that cats shouldn't be allowed to roam wild on their own. Or if I'm talking about writing classes, maybe I'm going to argue that they should be abolished or should not be abolished. Or I can argue that grades are unnecessary in college, or I can argue that grades are necessary in college. So whatever my topic is. And then using a because clause, I can give the main rationale for my reason. Now, I've seen versions of this where they ask you to come up with 3 reasons why. That sort of classic number 3, right? You might have 4. You might have 5. Once you get over 5, you might need to start grouping your reasons so that it's not this weird long list. And so you might have a group of reasons that are all related And so you can kind of think about that too. But this is, again, this is an example of kind of working backwards, because you're thinking about what are the supporting reasons that I want to give for my position, and then you're adding those into the thesis. Um, then what's nice about the Sheridan Baker machine is that it gets you to start thinking about ways of adding nuance to your position, adding sort of a sophistication, a and what they call qualifications to your idea. And qualifications are where you say, okay, it might not always be true, or there are some exceptions to the rule, or there's some limiting factor that we want to introduce. And so as an example, in here they suggest that you take off the because clause just for clarity's sake. And so here it says, although it is against a cat's instinct of wanderlust to be restrained, right? That means that cats don't want to be restrained. Cats don't like to be restrained. That's kind of acknowledging the counter argument there, right? Acknowledging the opposing viewpoint. The response is the crowded nature of city life demands that cats not be allowed to roam around freely, right? So that means cats should be subject to leash laws, right? It's phrasing it, but it's adding a layer of sophistication to that, adding a layer of nuance, right? We're talking about city life. We're talking about how crowded it is. But we're also adding in why somebody might not agree with our thesis. In the second example, the although gifted high school graduates should be exempt from writing classes, most entering students need help in attaining college level writing skills. So instead of just saying we need writing classes, they should not be abolished, what we're saying is, okay, there are circumstances where maybe we can allow people to test out of a writing class. And yet for the majority of students, a writing class is still necessary. Okay. In the third example, the although, um, is, hey, well, there might be a legitimate need to evaluate the work of college students. Um, so it's saying, okay, here's a limiting factor. You know, we do need to have some sort of a form of evaluation. It's still going to argue that the traditional grading system, the A, B, C, D, F, hinders learning and stifles creativity because people are focused on getting a specific letter grade. Okay, so you start off with a claim that you're making about the topic. You add in the because, right? Then you think about an although clause, right? An although. And then you want to test your faith in your thesis and explore the ways that other people might think about it. I'm sorry, my allergies are acting up, so I'm trying not to sneeze. Okay, um, but you try to reverse your position. Now that reverse position is not going to be your thesis necessarily. It's just allowing yourself to think about your argument from the other side of the aisle, as it were, right? The opposing viewpoint. And so for the cat one, it says the cat's independent and adaptable nature makes it the only pet capable of living an unrestricted existence within the city. So again, we're still saying, okay, we're in the city, but it is the only kind of pet that can do this. It's the only kind of pet that shouldn't have a leash law. For the second example, although introductory writing classes may have remedial value for some students, they're saying, okay, maybe some people do need it. Most high school graduates do possess writing skills sufficient for success in college courses, right? And so it's flipping that initial thought on a head, saying, okay, some people need it, but most people don't, right? And then the last one says, traditional grading procedures may offend educational purists, but public school systems require pragmatic approaches to evaluation. Okay, so that's, again, flipping it on its head. And the idea of the Sheridan Baker thesis machine is it's not a perfect way, and you don't follow a formula every time you write a thesis, but it's a helpful thinking process to go through as you're trying to develop your main idea. Is what is the topic? What claim do I want to make about that topic? That's number 2, right? What is my main reason, or what are my main reasons? What are the exceptions to the rule, right? What are the exceptions to my point of view? And then finally, what would the opposing viewpoint look like? And that can help you really hone your argument well as well. So I believe that one of my students talked to me about this. It might have been a different website, but there is a website called thesisstatementmaker.com. There might be some others where you can kind of go through a similar process. So the main idea you're defending, your first strongest argument, your second strongest argument, and then again, this has just 2 instead of 3 or 4 or 5, and then a counter argument to your position. So imagine that we're arguing about whether or not pineapples belong on pizza. I might say pineapples belong on pizza. And then my first strongest argument might be they add a sweetness that balances out the saltiness of pizza, right? And then I might add, my second strongest argument might be they add a juiciness that balances out the dryness of the crust. And then my main counter argument are for this is pineapples make pizza overly sweet and soggy. Okay, so let's see how this works. So I'm going to click make a thesis statement. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording because I think the video might be making this slow down a little. Okay, so I was able to find it. I just had to scroll down. And so it says your thesis statement, and then they have 5 different possible thesis statements. Even though pineapples make pizza overly sweet and soggy, I'd probably add can make them. Pineapples belong on pizza because they add a sweetness that balances the saltiness of pizza, and they add a juiciness that balances out the dryness of the crust. Again, a little wordy, but we could make it work. The second version is pineapples belong in pizza because they add a sweetness that balances out the saltiness. I'm going to take out the of pizza and add a juiciness that balances out the dryness of the crust. Or whereas pineapples, I would add can make pizza overly sweet and soggy. I might say they belong on pizza given that they add sweetness and juiciness, something like that. Since they add a sweetness that balances out the saltiness and a juiciness that balances out the dryness, pineapples belong on pizza. Or pineapples belong on pizza even though, and then I don't want to say pineapples make, but I might say they can make pizza overly sweet and soggy, something like that. So this is useful. You would still want to go through and edit and refine, but it's certainly a way of helping you kind of form a thesis statement, helping you think through the process. So I hope that that's a helpful kind of explanation of 3 ways of helping you form your thesis statement, right? The first, of course, being think about what your essential question is or your central question is and answer that question. The second being work backwards from your body. Write your body and work your way into the thesis. And the third being try using something like the Sheridan Baker thesis machine or the thesis statement maker to help you go through the process of figuring out what it is you're trying to argue. Hope that helps. And it's your turn to try.